Hello everyone, this is CounterYolo, bringing you another video in Star Trek Online. And today I'm going to talk about the best things to buy from the C-Store when we're excluding all the Tier 6 stuff inside the game. And that excludes a whole bunch of it. There was a bit of changes in the past couple of months that impacted a lot of the value of a lot of the stuff that's not from Tier 6 starships inside the game. And so that's partly why this video is going to be made. So I'm going to talk briefly about what changes basically happened to necessitate this type of video. And then I'll go over the best starships and shuttles to buy from the C-Store for the reasons of actually flying the starships. And then I'll talk about the best consoles and weapons from specific non-Tier 6 starships that are potentially worthwhile to buy, in my personal opinion, with all that. And this is in two different categories. One of them is for ship-specific stuff, and one is for non-ship-specific stuff, or stuff that's fairly generally usable as long as your faction has access to those consoles or weapons. Feel free to see the links in the description, but well, at least this will be a whole lot quicker than my last video talking about the strongest survival and tanking consoles inside the game. So at least be grateful for that. Now, for this first part with the recent changes, for those of you that haven't been caught up in some of the recent things going on in Star Trek Online, as of with the Rise of Discovery expansion, Tier 6 starships now scale with us from level 1 all the way up to level 65. Their passive stats continually increase, and so that's extremely nice. Because of that, you no longer need to continually buy a Tier 1, then a Tier 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a Tier 6 starship for Super Endgame. You can use a Tier 1 starship and use that entirely from the moment that you finish the tour all the way into the end game if you so choose. You'll typically switch at least a couple just to get starship traits if you have those, and then go to whatever your final ship is going to be. Now, this works for the most part. The only stuff that this doesn't apply to right now is some specific fleet starships, and in fact most of the fleet starships in the game don't have this Tier 6 scaling right now. Anything that is older than the Fleet Europa currently does not scale into the endgame right now. Anything that has been released after the Fleet Europa will when it comes to fleet starships. However, if it's anything from the C-Store or if it's from the exchange, like low-buy, lockbox, and promotion pack starships, all of those Tier 6 starships will scale, and you can use them right after the tutorial is over for your faction. That is not an issue still. It's just a little quirk with fleet starships that Cryptic has decided not to change yet. Anyway, so when it comes to stuff that's not Tier 6, so Tier 0 or shuttles, up to Tier 5 starships, none of their consoles, if the starship has consoles, none of them actually have passive stats. It's just a clicky console typically with them, or a passive effect that's always on. Some of those are actually pretty good. None of them have starship traits. The Tier 5 starships that have Tier 5U capability, if they're upgraded, then they have passive mastery as well, just like the Tier 6 starships, otherwise they don't. In terms of scaling, the only ones that scale is the prototype Walker, and that one scales from a Tier 1 to a Tier 4 starship, and then it stops. No other starships in this category scale at all besides shuttles. Shuttles obviously scale because there's only one tier for shuttles, which is Tier 0. When it comes to the pricing themselves, shuttles and Tier 1 starships are 500 Zen from the C-Store. Tier 2 starships are 750, Tier 3 is 1000, Tier 4 is 1500. As for Tier 5 starships, there's two different variants. There's the gimped versions, which actually have a console less than the endgame stat capable other version of Tier 5 starships. Because of that, there's actually a price difference between these two types of Tier 5. So for those of you that are wondering, what are the better Tier 5 starships from the C-Store? Check the pricing. If it's 2000 Zen, it honestly sucks, and you're going to be down an extra console. Even if you do the Tier 5U upgrade, you're going to be down one console over what you should be expecting from an endgame starship. If it's 2500 Zen, then you don't have really anything to worry about, and if you use the Tier 5U upgrade, you'll be able to have the amount of consoles that you're expecting from that starship. Which then comes to the two different types of Tier 6 starships from the exchange, or from the C-Store, which is really weird because both the gimped version and the endgame stat version of Tier 6 have the exact same price. one of the reasons why my article talking about this on the STO Reddit got shot down into oblivion was because since I looked at the pricing myself and saw that Tier 5 had 2 different price points, I thought that Tier 6 should also have 2 different price points here, and ships like the ones from the 31st Century Temple Ship Bundle probably should be 3,500 Zen based upon this pricing here. If Cryptic changes that because of that article in this video, I am sorry, but realistically, that's probably the way that they should be, though. Now, for those of you wondering, like, well, why are a lot of these gimped? Well, because we have fleet starships that is there to have Cryptic get a lot of additional revenue as well with fleet modules, which there'll be a video coming out pretty soon, which I'll talk about some of the financial stuff and how Cryptic makes money dealing with lockboxes and gambling inside of the game. There'll be a fun discussion in there talking about that. So for the TLDR of this is, why should you buy anything other than shuttles and Tier 6 starships? Well, outside of buying shuttles, it's mainly going to be with consoles and weapons. There's going to be one niche exception for Tier 5 starships, which we'll also cover in the next section. So okay. Now for this next section, we'll talk about the C-Store starships themselves that I think are worthwhile to buy. And of course, for this first little part, we'll talk about the 3 shuttles, one for each faction, of course, because that's just what's in the C-Store. The best one for Romulans is the Scorpion Fighter. I haven't flown this recently enough to remember if there's anything else special besides its 1 bridge officer seat. Typically, you want to have 2 bridge officer seats equivalent on your starship. I know they have singularity abilities for sure because it's a Romulan starship. I just can't remember if there's anything else special here for a second thing that'll be equivalent of like a bridge officer ability. They have 2 tactical consoles and it's decently maneuverable, and it's got a Romulan battle cloak because it's a Romulan starship. And it's 500 Zen like any other shuttle from the C-Store. The best ones for the KDF is going to be the T0-T5 fighter, or however you say that. It's a bit more maneuverable than the Romulan starship, and the thing that it gets for its 2nd bridge officer ability is Cannon Rapid Fire 1, which is actually decently significant because none of the shuttles inside the game have anything above an ensign level bridge officer ability available in terms of its like abilities that you actually get to choose. And Cannon Rapid Fire is an ability that you don't get until the lieutenant level for bridge officer seating. So it's actually a decently powerful ability. Unfortunately, in shuttle PvP, cannons aren't necessarily the meta, but if you want to have fun and use cannons for a shuttle build, this is probably the shuttle to use. As for the most well-rounded, that would go to the Federation with the Delta Flyer. In my opinion, in terms of the raw stats on this thing, combined with its bridge officer seating and consoles, it is the most well-rounded in the entire game. If you want to go slightly more defensive, there is the Voth fighter from the exchange. It's not an account unlock. You do have to pay in the tens of millions of credits to get that ship, and there's barely any missions that require shuttles, so it's a thing that you get to buy that you barely get to use inside the game, which is why I would probably say for shuttles, for the most part, just buy something from the C-Store and it'll be doable for the limited missions that you actually use shuttles. Or just deal with blowing up a few times in those missions. There also is a Vulcan shuttle from a Vulcan Tier 5 ship that costs 2,000 Zen. Can't remember the ship offhand, but it's a really cool looking Vulcan starship. If you buy that starship, you get a Vulcan shuttle with it as well that has 2 science consoles on it. So it's actually a pretty nice science-y Healy starship. If you want to go that rough, if you happen to have a little group and are doing shuttle PvP. Just saying. But that's really not super prevalent in the game right now. Also, Cryptic hasn't really been promoting shuttles since Legacy of Romulus, which has been a little while. We haven't gotten new maps with shuttles really since then. So anyway, as for the set of ships that I consider worthwhile to buy from the C-Store, would be the Dyson Science Destroyers. Unfortunately, right now, we don't have any Tier 6 Science Destroyers available from the C-Store nor the fleet. The only Tier 6 ones available inside the game at all are from the exchange. And that would be the Section 31 Science Destroyer most recently, the Crossfield Science Spearhead, and then the Mirror Crossfield Science Destroyer All those are from the exchange, 2 are from lockbox, 1 is from promotion pack. So none of those are account unlock either, and all those are stuck to the Federation. So if you're if you're a KDF captain or a KDF aligned Romulan, your only option for a science destroyer is through the C store, and it's through these specific starships here. Because of that, these are honestly the only endgame starships I would say are worthwhile that aren't tier 6 to buy from the C store. All the other tier 5 stuff, in my opinion, there is better stuff available, at least in that class, from the C store or from the fleet that you can be able to use. These ships are also pretty cool looking, so there is that upside as well. So for our next section, last one is our ship-specific consoles, or consoles that are either limited to one particular ship or a very limited number of ships inside the game. Bottoming out the list here is the Singularity Inverter. It's basically the prototype Walker's console, but it's a little bit older, and it's only available for warbirds inside the game. It still can be used on basically any warbird, so it's still decently good. And also because this is much older inside the game, its clicky isn't as powerful as what you kind of expect for today's clickies. It still is very respectable and reduces damage shields by 30%, so that is still really nice and useful. Number 6 is the Sympathetic Frequency Transceiver. This was in my last video with the strongest rival and taking consoles inside the game. This is a decent console. It's still respectable. The 3-piece is exceptionally good, but in my opinion, the other 2 consoles you have to use to get that 3-piece, in my opinion, for cost benefits with other strong consoles in the game, isn't strong enough, in my opinion, to warrant losing 2 other consoles to get that 3-piece. That's just my opinion personally. It's still a great AoE hull and shield heal. It boosts your EPG a little bit as well for your exotic based effects. Still a nice console. It's only usable on the multi-mission explorers though, inside the game. So if you're gonna find one of those, this is a decent one because there are tier 6 versions of these as well. Just so all of you know. Number 5 is gonna be the cloaking device. Technically, this is limited, but basically when it comes to PvP, most of you are going to be using escorts or raiders inside the game anyway, and that's what light escorts are for the Federation. So if you're going to be flying any of those ships and you're a Federation captain, then this is a decent thing to throw on there as well. In my opinion, cloaks, either you'll want a cloak in PvP or you'll want to have extreme durability in PvP. Most starships for Klingon Empire and Roman Republic have cloaks already built into their starships, so you don't have to lose a slot for it. Federation starships, because they don't have cloaks typically, it's nice to put this on your starship, at least for the beginning, so you can cloak with the rest of your team as you're trying to sneak up on the other enemy team. It's not a battle cloak, so you can't use it in combat, but it's still nice. Number 4 is the Molecular Phase Inversion Field. This was nerfed heavily since I talked about this in the last video. Its duration has been significantly reduced, but it is still a nice clicky. If there's an insane amount of torpedo damage that's about to hit you, you can click this and you're not going to die. You're immune to all that for the duration of this clicky. Not long, but it is there, and it's available to be used on any warbird in the game. And it's 300 bonus damage resistance rating plus a 90% shield resistance rating, so it's pretty powerful, honestly. Also, weapons are offline, so that's a downside, but its duration was also lowered significantly, so it's not just for your EPG science tanks anymore for warbirds. Anyway, number 3 is the Blade Generator, basically the slightly better version of the Romulan console, but it's also even more limited on the starships that you can use this on. Basically, it's just the starships that appear like Voyager are the ones that you can actually use this console on. And so the best one will be to obviously be the fleet version of the fleet's long-range science vessel, which you have to get the tier 5 military to get that starship. So it's not available to a lot of players in the game in terms of the best endgame capable stuff for it. This is the best console for bonus damage resistance in the game. 900 bonus damage resistance puts you up to 90% resistance on your hull for every category right off the bat. Not even including all the other things that could be adding to damage resistance rate on your ship. I've done pictures in other videos showing how high my percentage has been when I've tried to go super high on them. You could become basically invulnerable when you use this console if you stacked other traits on your starship. It's really, really nice to have a console. Number 2 isn't really one console, but it's hard for me to talk about one of these without talking about the other one, so I'm going to cheat here and talk about both at the same time. Basically, the scimitars in the game already are very strong in their own right. SOB has talked about before on STL Reddit about, before they added the tier 6 scimitars, and before they added the Valor Juggernaut, he and other DPS players were adamant, kept on using the tier 5 scimitars for a long time inside the game. The scimitars are some of the best Juggernaut class vessels inside the game. People will argue with me on that, but when I talked about my Starship classes video, stuff about different classes, that is where these ships fall. And they are super awesome. Even though they have a Romulan Battle Cloak, what these two consoles together basically do is Cloak Barrage gives you effectively what Enhanced Battle Cloak normally gives you, except it also works with all weapons and not just specific select ones like torpedoes. Additionally with this, if you use the Singular Distributor unit, you can keep your shields up while you're firing at enemies while you're cloaked, which is really powerful and is extremely synergistic with, wanting to do cloaking during combat, even in like PvE environment stuff with like doing DPS. Effectively, you can use the cloak traits and constantly be barraging enemies with damage the entire time. It's extremely nice. You do unfortunately lose 2 console slots to be able to do that, but I think it's pretty nice and pretty fun to do. And some of my more DPS oriented builds inside the game, I like to do this whenever I switch my tanking scimitar into a more DPS scimitar for fun. I will switch to the tactical version, do all tactical consoles, and then I'll put 2 of my consoles in there with these 2, just so that I lose a bit of threat as I'm going in and out of cloak. This is super fun. It's not necessarily the most strategically best thing for a pure DPS build or a PvP build per se. You'll still want more maneuverability in PvP, frankly, just the way it is. But this is a very fun one. So it adds something very, very different that you're not going to get anywhere else in the game. The only other enhanced battle cloaks available in the game, frankly, are a few select light warbirds and the Burrell Bird of Prey. That's it. So, and in my opinion, this is the most fun version of it, frankly, available in the entire game. As for the number 1 here, I have to go with the Shield Absorber Frequency Generator. I've talked about this in several videos at this point. If you're going to fly a warbird and you're struggling with survival, or you want to tank in a warbird, in either one of the American Worker warbirds or the scimitars, this is probably one of your best consoles to put on it. You can add in the Blade Hazard Shielding console from the Arbiter or its Klingon or Romulan equivalents to get the 25% weapon power cost reduction plus an OK clicky. Unfortunately, that they did nerf this console a little bit. They kind of nerfed it. Since I talked about this last year, instead of a proc that's constantly on, it's only on when your shields are at 90% or lower. So basically, if you're taking damage, then this proc activates. If you're not taking damage, then this proc isn't going to activate. So it's not much of a nerf, but it is something. As a tank, you can't have this proc starting to go off until after your shields have on one of the faces have fallen below 90%. So it's not going to be a proc that you'll initially have, but it's a proc that during combat you will have. Other than that, it's still a fantastic console. And if you're struggling with survival on Warbird, I would highly recommend getting that console. As for non-specific consoles and weapons, these are ones that basically, if your faction can access the console or weapon, you probably can use it on your starship. There'll be one group of weapons that deals with quad cannons that obviously they'll have the same limitations as regular dual cannons, dual heavy cannons have for starships, but with the exception of that one, basically if you can access the console or weapon for your faction, then you can use it on basically any starship inside the game. So with that, let's get started. With the bottom of the list, we'll talk about the TOS twin phaser beam arrays. This is here simply because even though for tier 6 starships they have weapons that scale to the end game, technically to Mark 12, but those weapons are common rarity weapons. They aren't any higher. And so because of that, a lot of those weapons just don't feel good even when you're leveling. Maybe because I've leveled 21 characters in the game. But anyway, when you're leveling that many characters inside the game, using common rarity weapons the entire time just doesn't feel the same. But if you use rare weapons the entire time, it feels great. It feels awesome. And so if you're a Federation or Federation aligned captain, the TOS phaser beam arrays, like if you basically claim the ship a bunch of times and strip off the phaser beam arrays and then use them and then fill out your weapon slots for your starship, it will get you through the game just fine. And then if you're at level 50 and want to fly TFOs, if you want to queue normal TFOs, the rare weapons will do just fine there as well. If you want to do advanced, hopefully you have a tier 6 starship and you have some nice clickies to help out. Anyway, these are great weapons. To my knowledge, there aren't any other rare scalable weapons available inside the game that are able to be used for all of your slots. There are a lot of missions that if you complete the mission, you can get a weapon that's scalable to the end game and are typically at very rare rarity that you can start to replace some of these weapons with as you get through in the game. But yeah, at least for starting out, like right after the tutorial, this is like your best in slot stuff to use for a long time inside the game. As for next on this list is the circular polarity modulator. This is from the prototype Walker. It's 1500 sent from the Discovery Starter Pack. Technically, individually for this ship, I think it might be at 750 Zen. Whenever I tried to claim the 750 Zen Starship itself on my second account just for fun, I had issues claiming the ship on multiple characters. And it wasn't something I was able to have Cryptic help me resolve. So my recommendation is just to do the Discovery Starter Pack. Just claiming the pack is easily claimable on all of your characters. Maybe the Cryptic has fixed the issue at this point, but I haven't tried. The ship itself should be a little bit cheaper than that. This is only available to Federation and Federation allies. As I've tested this out more since I initially tried this out, what this console basically is, and this sounds really powerful when you actually think about this from a tanking perspective, is that this is an additional reverse shield polarity available from a console that doesn't put reverse shield polarity on cooldown. So whatever you consider that, for a lot of standard tanking builds, by the way, they use reverse shield polarity at the maximum rank for their starship and then use the duty officer that extends reverse shield polarity by 8 seconds. Having another console that can potentially determine how high your shield healing is, because this right here scales with shield healing. If your shield healing is high enough, you can effectively add one console that adds another 20 seconds to your reverse shield polarity on your starship, and that is insanely powerful. Unfortunately, outside of tanks inside the game, you're probably not going to have shield healing up high enough for this to be worthwhile for you. But still, at least for leveling, it still is a fantastic survival console. So for non-tank players, this is still a great one for leveling. When you get to the end game, it's going to basically be worthless and not feel great for you. But at least while you're leveling, it's still going to feel good. For our next console is the Subspace Jumper. For KDF, you get this from a Tier 4 starship. For Federation and Allies, you get this off of the exchange. I can't remember what two console pack it's from, but search Subspace Jumper and you'll find it. Usable on any starship once you acquire it. This console is I want to fly a raider in PvP, but I don't want to think as much about trying to get in the flanking arc of my enemy that I'm trying to fight. Target your enemy, click the button, and you're now immediately in their rear arc for at least a second or so before they turn again. Very great for PvP. PvE, not as much per se, but I mean, there's going to be a lot of consoles like this you'll see in this video and some other videos if you get my link in a week or so about PvP. If you're part of Alpha Squadron Elite, you will get that link if you're part of Discord that I've been working on for quite a bit now, for about this whole month. Just talk about that because I want to have it be nice and good for you all. Very great console. You will see this in a bit of your Raider PvP builds. The console in PvP I think is a little bit more usable is the Impulse Capacitance Cell, or however you say that. This console is basically the get out of jail free, I need to leave immediately. Most of my other cooldowns are gone and I just need to get out of Dodge. This is the console to use. Lots of flight speed, lots of defense. You lose turn rate, but this is basically like full impulse, like out of nowhere trying to get away from an enemy. And it is pretty good at it. There are some specific raiders, especially if you have Commander Pilot, that can potentially keep up with you. But outside of some of them, using this cookie will at least get you at least some reprieve from enemy fire. And at least for a lot of at least budget PvP builds, this is one of the highest ones that I recommend, especially because when you consider a lot of PvP builds use a lot of stuff off of the exchange. And this is a 750 Zen item for Federation Captains, and it's unlocked for your entire account. It is a steal console for PvP builds. For number 5, this is more of a convenience thing for some of you that don't use cruisers and don't use like broadsiding arrays and stuff, don't use beam arrays and things. Basically, if you're getting swarmed by a lot of Herc or Feklari in missions, this is probably the console for you. It's basically I don't want to worry about frigates and small craft inside of my TFOs and missions console. This console basically just worries about those for you. Does triple damage to frigates and 10 times the damage to small craft. So, and other small craft like fighters. Basically make sure that they go away really, really quickly. If for some reason you're doing a PvP battle and someone has a bazillion summon things, and somehow you can't kill the carrier, which shouldn't really be a thing. But anyway, if that's the situation for you, this is also a decent console as well. And of course, number 4 here, because I mentioned this earlier, are the quad cannons. Right there are the 3 ships for the 3 different quad cannons available inside the game. The KDF version is a little bit cheaper. It's from a tier 3 ship instead of tier 4, so it's 500 Zen cheaper, just kind of how the math is, honestly. Basically, part of the power drained is from engines instead of fully from weapons, like other dual heavy cannons are typically inside the game. Slower firing rate, like kind of similar to dual heavy cannons. It is a little bit different. Technically, when it comes to the dual cannon category, I prefer dual cannons over dual heavy cannons and quad cannons personally. But I do typically have, in my own personal cannon builds, when it's a DPS oriented, I typically like to have at least a quad cannon and a dual heavy cannon in there, just so that there's like a couple of different firing points, because I like at least some of that combat to look a little bit distinctly different whenever I'm firing at enemies in PvE. But that's just me personally. It's honestly up to you whether you want to have a quad cannon in your build if you're doing a cannon-oriented type of build. If you do, then those are the ships for it, and they do add some cosmetic variety to your build. Otherwise, don't worry about it. a lot of builds are perfectly acceptable without a quad cannon in there. Number 3 in this list is going to be the M6 computer. If I recall correctly, I think Timberwolf talks about this console a lot, frankly, in that if you don't have the Domino console or one of the older equivalents like the Tactical System Stabilizer or Flagship Tactical Computer, which both of these consoles are stuck to specific starships, the Domino is available to be used on all starships, which is why this has been used on so many DPS builds as of late, because the clicky is great, the passive is also great as well. You see this a lot in PvP because it's got accuracy on there too. All around super solid A+ tier console in the game, but and a lot of my tanks in the game have access to one of these other 2 consoles, so you don't see me use Domino a lot on my starships. But if you don't have access to any of those, the M6 computer is a decent alternative. It does decent for firing cycle haste and cooldowns to some bridge officer abilities, along with a bit of additional accuracy and defense, so it's also kind of decent for PvP as well if you can't afford some of the other stronger consoles inside the game too. Unfortunately, it's only available to Federation and Allies, like a lot of the consoles in this video. It's kind of unfortunate, but, you know, one of these days, Cryptic will allow access for those consoles to all factions in some form, whether they just give access to all those ships to all factions in the game, or they actually just unlock those consoles for the opposite faction. Number 2 and number 1 are going to be consoles that I actually haven't talked about on this channel before. I personally feel they are very strong. They are sleeper OP inside the game. They are very good, but they have their niche circumstances for them. This first one is the Resonance Cascade Modulator. This is from the Steam Runner bundle, another console that's only available to Federation and Allies. I would say if you're going to be making a healer build, a healer tank build for PvP, and you're on the Federation side, I would consider this a must-have console to put on your starship. This is a console that is basically the Extend Shield's ability, but it applies to your entire team, not just one person, and it stops shield bleed through for the duration of the console. It's 12 seconds instead of 20, like a lot of other clickies in the game, frankly. But stopping shield bleed through is insane, and especially when it goes to your entire team, that is really insane. Combine that with overloaded safe linkage if you want to be a healer / tank in PvP. Very, very strong 2 console combo. A lot of times in PvP, when I used to do it a lot of times enemies would start targeting me because they saw a cruiser, then they realize, oh, they can't kill the cruiser and they focus other people. Consoles like this would help make sure that, you know, when my allies are getting targeted instead of me, I can use stuff to keep them alive. And now with the Europa console, if they're really getting targeted super hard, I can make sure that half of the damage goes to me instead of them. So consoles are there to help not only keep you alive, but in PvP to help keep your allies alive as well when they aren't targeting you. This is one of the best consoles in the game to do that, and it's not even from a tier 6 starship. So it's extremely strong. Hopefully Cryptic adds more consoles like this into the game, but maybe that's just me dreaming here. Number 1 is here because I'm a fanboy. I like Picard, and so of course the Picard maneuver is going to be number 1 here. No, it's not technically called the Picard maneuver, but it's from the Stargazer. It's effectively the Picard maneuver, come on. Technically it's called Warp Burst Capacitor. Technically the science isn't really fully sound based on how the rest of Star Trek works, but you know, it's fun to talk about. It's a teleport that gives you bonus damage, creates a duplicate, and makes you untargetable for 5 seconds. It's a great console. For nostalgia reasons, I love this thing and it's number 1. It's also decent in PvP as well. So that's just me for my, of course, biased opinion here of why this is number 1 in this section. But anyway, those were some fun consoles and ships and such. that if you're looking at stuff that's not tier 6 from the C-Store, those are some good ones, in my opinion, to at least check out and possibly consider to actually buy if you have money to spend in the C-Store. I know a lot of you don't, and that's totally fine as well. This is a free-to-play game, so that's not something you necessarily need. There's just a lot of cool, fun stuff that's there as well. Or if you have lots of money to burn, there's some other cool things to potentially burn and just to trap for fun as well. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and enjoy the rest of your week.